the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Actually, a correction. It is not Paul Finebaum. This is the Paul Finebaum Show. But this is Ryan McGee, senior writer from ESPN the magazine. It's the holiday season, which means that Paul is somewhere, I guess, stuffing stockings. Not sure what he's doing. Perhaps he's stuffing stockings for his favorite callers, our favorite callers. Maybe he's stuffing coal in those stockings for some. But this is the Paul Finebaum Show, and I'm honored to be here. I appreciate Paul asking me to fill in. We've got a great lineup today. Trevor Maddich is going to join us, of course, analyst for ESPN, and played in the league forever, was on that great BYU national championship team. Marty Smith, you'll recognize him as the redheaded guy from SportsCenter. Marty obviously has been kind of the face of NASCAR for SportsCenter for years now. And Marty and I host a podcast on ESPN.com, the Marty McGee podcast. And Marty's going to be joining us. He's been working hard on the college football beat lately. He spent last week in Tallahassee talking to Jameis Winston, talking to Jimbo Fisher, then got on a plane and went to Ohio State and talked to the folks up there. So he's heavy in New Orleans pregame duty right now. We'll talk to Marty about that. Bo Bounds, of course, really the radio voice of all things Mississippi sports, but particularly football, is going to join us later. And we'll be talking to him about Chad Kelly. And I know some folks have bad holidays. You're not having as bad a holiday as Chad Kelly. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And Maria Taylor, our friend from the SEC Network, the building, of course, that we're in down here at Charlotte. Speaking of the SEC Network, we're not on TV today. It's all basketball on TV today, so we're just strictly radio, which is awesome because I didn't have to shave. So Jameis Winston, this was the big news that came down on Sunday. And you may have missed it because in typical kind of Florida State fashion with these things, it kind of happened kind of cloak and dagger. Middle of the afternoon on Sunday, if you really in the evening on Sunday, if you weren't paying attention to Twitter or watching the bottom line on ESPN, in the middle of a full slate of NFL games, this was the news that broke that Jameis Winston was cleared Sunday of the accusations he faced from a student code of conduct hearing. This, of course, goes to the sexual assault allegations from 2 years ago. The letter that was written to Winston, and this is the man that ruled on this, was a former Florida Supreme Court Justice, Major Harding. And the quote that we've seen out there, kind of the bullet point line is, quote, insufficient to satisfy the burden of proof. That's basically the same thing the prosecutor in Tallahassee, William Meggs, said a year ago. So, again, Jameis Winston has had to deal with a lot of noise. He's had to deal with a lot of finger pointing. He's had to deal with a lot of seeing himself on every news media outlet in the world. And once again, at least for now, it's kind of quieted down. He can go into the holidays not worried about it. This is more than likely not the end. If you talk to legal analysts and you talk to the people that cover this case on a daily basis, and again, we'll talk to Marty Smith about it in a little bit, there is an appeal option. There's a civil suit option. I think once Winston is out of school and becomes, for lack of a better term, a free and independent grown-up. So this is not going to go away. But for now, Jameis Winston, again, looked like he was staring right into the face of trouble, and now he can just get ready for football. It's a remarkable ability that the group has to compartmentalize. And, again, this is something we'll talk to Marty Smith about later because he talked to Winston and specifically, I think, really in more depth with Jimbo Fisher, the head coach of Florida State, about this, which is that ability to, all this noise is going on over here, and yet you can still get ready for football over here. And the question is, when you're in the ACC, and Paul and I talked about this a couple weeks ago, when you're in the ACC, you can spot teams a lead in the first half, and you can deal with all the racket and all the satellite trucks outside the practice facility all week. And, again, seeing your name on the bottom line on ESPN and seeing the stories about you leading every website, every sports news show that there is, particularly SportsCenter. But then you still have a chance to come back in the second half with that Winston magic. And there's a lot of questions about whether or not you can push that envelope as far as they typically push it against Oregon. Personally, I don't think that they can. The other news that's going on, and again, it involves accusations and finger pointing and potential legal issues. Chad Kelly. And this is how Chad Kelly is portrayed. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. where we're coming from today. When you read about Chad Kelly in the Carolinas, this ex-Clemson quarterback Chad Kelly. Well, as of just a couple of days ago, it became Ole Miss quarterback Chad Kelly. For folks that don't know, Chad Kelly's a guy that was dismissed from Clemson, been playing, junior college ball. He is the nephew of Jim Kelly, of course, the NFL legend, the Hall of Famer, and the man who's been so inspirational now for such a long time with his fight against cancer. Well, Chad Kelly had an incident over the weekend, and there are accusations that he tells the bouncers, I'm going to go get my AK-47 and spray the place. There's video that one side says, this is Chad Kelly starting something, and the other side says this is Chad Kelly being provoked. The bigger question is where does Ole Miss and where does Hugh Freeze fall on all this? And this is something that we're going to talk about again later in the show, and that's why we're going to have Bo Bounds on. We're going to talk about, obviously, the bowl games coming up, but that Chad Kelly thing is obviously one of the biggest stories. And then actual football. How great was it on Saturday? And I realize we had the Army-Navy game, we had the playoffs in the lower divisions, but how great was it on Saturday? I think it was great to have like a full slate of bowl games. Right now, as I speak, the Miami Beach Bowl is being played in the municipal disaster that is the Florida Marlins ballpark. It's beautiful. But that's a whole other story, and folks in South Florida know all about that. It's beautiful. It's a $1 billion building. Sits on the old Orange Bowl site. Maybe this is where Miami should be playing its football games because the students aren't willing to go just a little bit further north to whatever we're calling Joe Robbie Pro Player Land Shark Stadium, whatever that is now. But as we speak, Sun Life. Yeah, there you go, Sun Life Stadium. As we speak, Memphis leads BYU 24-14. The first quarter was defense optional. I'm just going to say they were probably out on South Beach all night. But I argue this about bowl games. I realize there's 39 of them. I realize that people point to that and say it's money grabbing and, why are all these games on? And I get all that. And I understand that the system's a little crooked. It's ridiculous that schools have to meet minimums as far as ticket prices or ticket purchases are concerned. After travel, most schools, even the big schools, lose money on these trips. And I get that some of the names are ridiculous. But would I get on a plane right now and go to the Popeyes Bahamas Bowl? Fried chicken on the beach and football over the holidays? I'm all for that. Listen, my father was a college football official, referee for years. I bring that up all the time. So I grew up. My holidays were spent going to bowl games. Your dad worked almost 20 of them. And he worked the Rose Bowl and worked the Orange Bowl, but he also worked the small bowl games, the Las Vegas Bowl on Christmas Day. I wrote a column about this on Friday. The small bowl games are actually more fun. I talked to Mark Rick about this last week. He was in town in Charlotte to promote the Belk Bowl. Next week, Georgia will play Louisville. Georgia rolls in, I think, on Christmas Eve. Going to spend Christmas Day in a hotel in Charlotte. But they also get to drive race cars at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. There's a lot of things they're going to get to do. And for these guys that this is their last college football game ever, Mark Rick got a little chippy when I asked him, what about going to the big bowl games versus the small bowl games? And he goes, we're just glad to be in a bowl game. I think it's 14 straight. Every year he's been at Georgia, they've played one. And obviously they've been in the Sugar Bowl, and they've also been in some little ones. But he said it, and this is the part that I think we get jaded to and we kind of brush off our shoulder. But the fact of the matter is, forget the old gray guys with the suits that pocket the cash. Even forget my bosses at ESPN that quite frankly, in the case of the Camellia Bowl on Saturday night, that was kind of a made-up football game. But did you see the game? The kids were playing their tails off. They wanted to win. For so many of those guys, it was the last time they'll ever play football. And they had the national stage. Weren't many people at the game, but the numbers were pretty good in the second half. There were some incredible plays in that game. So I maintain I'd rather have the bowl game, all these small bowl games than not. What's wrong with having more football?
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
I've got like a Leonard Skinner Christmas album, but you figure Jimmy had to have laid down some Christmas tracks at some point, right?
Yeah, or Slash or somebody now just do it,
Yeah.
I'd like to see Foo Fighters do a Christmas album in the style that they do on Sonic Highways, whatever that show was on HBO. That's fantastic stuff. I'd like to see them just bang it out. I love the different styles that people have.
Yeah, I mean, I used to drive my mother crazy. I got a hold of that James Brown Christmas album, and she loved it. I came from a house that listened to soul music, and it's like, after a while, it's like, hey, can we just take a break and listen to, like, Bing Crosby or somebody? But I'm like, no, Jimmy. But hey, so I was talking about this earlier, Trevor, and I think you can appreciate this. I wrote a column on Friday on ESPN.com about the smaller bowl games. And I grew up with a dad that was a college football official, so every holiday, that's where we were. We were at a bowl game somewhere, whether it was a big one or whether it was a tiny one. And in that story, I quote your old coach, Lavelle Edwards, for an ESPN magazine piece I did years ago about bowl games. And I was out there, I was at BYU, and he showed me all the Holiday Bowl trophies. And he said, these trophies might as well be made out of rebar. He said, because this is how we built this program. And you were a part of those days, particularly in the early 80s when you're going to the Holiday Bowl every year. But I maintain that the smaller bowls, I think they still have to be out there. How do you feel?
Of course they do. I mean, right now there's, 70-something bowls, and there are people that say that there are too many because they don't want to see, 6-6 Texas play 6-6 Arkansas, something like that. And my thought is, even for teams, like that, it is critical to have the bowls. And then you get down into the smaller teams. Look at Memphis at 9-3 this year that are playing in their first bowl since, I don't know, Nixon was president or some darn thing. It's been a long time. And certainly it's the first conference championship for a long time. But it's important for these schools because people think in terms of the BCS championship. They think in terms of, the Rose Fiesta, Orange, and Sugar Bowls. They think now in terms of the playoff. And because of that, they think the New Orleans Bowl or something like that is just too small to care about. But the fact of the matter is that the teams that are in those bowls, that's huge for them. They're able to say that they're a bowl champion. They're able to have the experience. The kids get the swag, the recruiting, the extra practice, all the things that go into it are things that are important to those 6-6, 7-5 teams. And my thought is, if you don't like it, then learn to use a television remote. If you don't want to watch a bowl game because you think it's not important to you, change the channel and watch something else and wait until New Year's Day if that's what you want to do. But in the meantime, I totally agree with you, and I agree with Lavelle Edwards, that smaller programs especially, the ones that aren't competing for the top four, these bowl games are a critical part of their building up into something that they can be proud of.
I was at the bowl game after you guys won the national championship in '85. It was a Citrus Bowl. I was a teenager, and my dad, I think, was a side judge in that game. And BYU's playing Ohio State in Florida on New Year's Day. And the look on they lost the game. It was a great game. They lost the game, but the look on everyone's face was, this is what you were building toward. It was to be on that stage with the big school. And I'm with you. I think that we get so jaded, we kind of forget that in the end, yeah, there's a lot wrong with the system, but in the end, it is kind of about the kids getting to have a great experience, and particularly the seniors maybe playing their last ever down of football.
Right, and for those who think that, well, you shouldn't be rewarded for 6-6 or 7-5, keep this in mind as well. A bowl is not a reward. A bowl is not a reward. A bowl at the end of the day is an economic proposal where businesses, communities, and charities get together and they put on an event because they think it will be good for their business, community, and charity. And it does bring a lot of good things surrounding things that have nothing to do with the football game itself. Now, the kids, it's a reward for them too, but there's just a lot that goes into bowl games. And, you go back to BYU, I just remember, when Lavelle Edwards first got to BYU couldn't beat their own cheerleaders. And he installed the passing game and started a run of All-American quarterbacks, and little by little built up to a national championship. And the bowl practices helped us do that. But even more than that, the bowl games gave us national exposure that allowed the voters in the polls and a national audience to see who in the world this BYU team was. And that holds true today.
Okay, let's talk about bowls. Outside of the obvious, obviously, and part of the argument about the bowls is that maybe they don't matter as much because of the playoff and the Power Five and all that. I argue that they'll actually mean more as that gap gets wider because that's the ultimate goal for these small schools. But when you look forward, obviously we're going to talk a lot about the playoff. We're going to talk a lot about those 2 games, those 3 games at the end. But what's the bowl game you're looking at between now and that first semifinal game where you're like, I can't wait for this one?
I can't wait for the Fiesta Bowl, frankly. That's Arizona and Boise State. And those are 2 of the most exciting teams in the country. I mean, offensively, Arizona's on the cutting edge of driving forward the spread option offenses that are driving defenses nuts. And it's not the same old read option that Rich Rodriguez, their coach, used to run when he was at West Virginia. There's all kinds of new things and advanced things that they're doing. And when you watch that offense, what you're seeing is the future of college football in terms of scheming on that side of the ball. And Boise State is still up to their crazy trick play stuff. I mean, you watch them all year. They've got a new coach this year. That's fine, but the identity is still there. And this game is shaping up to be a whole lot of fun. But I think my favorite one is the Bahamas Bowl. Now, Central Michigan and Western Kentucky, and bless their hearts, it's not the matchup necessarily. It's because it's the first year ever. They're leaving the United States of America for the Bahamas Bowl. And normally, if you're going to a bowl for the first time, you call coaches that have been there recently to ask them what the pitfalls are. Well, there's no one to call now. So they don't know which little restaurant off the hotel has bad ceviche and will give half their defense food poisoning. They don't know which moped dealer has bad mopeds that will strand their guys scattered all over the island. This game has sunburn, food poisoning, and hangover written all over it, and I can't wait for it.
I said it earlier. Is there any better scenario for a guy like me, Southern college football fan, fried chicken on the beach followed by a college football game?
Oh, man.
Right?
And Central Michigan, College Football Live played video of them where internally they were told which bowl they would go to. And it was a bowl in Detroit, nothing against Detroit, but Central Michigan is in just as much snow as Detroit is right now, or the Bahamas Bowl. And when they announced Bahamas Bowl, that place erupted. I mean, you might not think it's a big bowl, but to both of those teams and to their fans that go, it is a massive, massive event.
I was already looking at it. They've already, at least one of the teams, already been swimming with dolphins. So there you go. That's a good. If they just left right now and didn't play the game, went to the beach, got some sun, swam with dolphins. Happy holidays, right?
Yeah, that's a good thing. Although I'll tell you this, I did the Hawaii Bowl a few years ago. I'm doing it again on radio this Christmas Eve. So aloha. But the 1 year, Barry Alvarez of Wisconsin, I think was out there. Was that right?
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think I'm right. Yeah. The half the Wisconsin team was on the North Shore wading out into the ocean. They thought it was really cool. And come to find out, lifeguards were out there desperately trying to get them back in because of the way the tides were. If they'd have gone out much farther, they could have been swept away and, deposited on some beach 4 miles away, half the team. And so there's
Gilligan's Island.
We used to go, BYU, we played in the Holiday Bowl in San Diego, which was nice, leaving the snows of Utah. But we played at Hawaii in conference 3 out of the 4 years I was there, I think. And we would always have young guys go to the beach after leaving the snows of Utah and feel pretty good after about 20 minutes, even though they were told not to be out longer than that. So they'd stay another 20, then another 20, and the next thing you know, by game day, there's half a dozen young guys that are cooked by the sun, and coaches, trainers are pulling their jerseys and shoulder pads over their arms and down their bodies, just scraping on that sunburned skin. These guys screaming in pain because of the sunburn. And the veterans, we were just sitting there laughing at them. Hey, man, we told you, no sympathy at all. So, Bahamas, this is on the way now. College
baseball, I remember a Hawaii baseball coach telling me, he said, it's a home field advantage, not only because we know which way the wind's blowing, but we also know that they go out to Waikiki the day before. It's hard to swing the baseball bat when your jersey's stuck to your shoulders.
There's a lot to it there. And there's all kinds of fun little stories about it. But one thing that you mentioned, Ryan, about this, the teams that go, the players that go, they have an experience that they'll take with them for the rest of their life. I mean, I remember all 4 Holiday Bowls, and I remember experiences from all 4 Holiday Bowls, and I treasure all 4 Holiday Bowls. Only one of them mattered nationally. We actually won that game and won the national championship in my senior year. But the other 3, nationally, they weren't on the radar. But for us, it was the entire world. And we're seeing that right now in the bowls that we're seeing between now and New Year's Day.
And speaking of which, BYU scored just shortly ago, and now they trail Memphis by 4 with a little less than 5 minutes to go, about to make it 3. So good luck to you and the Cougs.
Yeah, and they're throwing the ball, too. It's looking like old BYU. I'm liking it.
Yeah, I think they left the defense out on South Beach. All right, Trevor, I appreciate the time, and enjoy your we'll be listening to you on radio from that tough assignment out in the middle of the Pacific.
Aloha. I will talk to you later on, man. It's great to talk with you always.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
This is not Paul Finebaum. It's Ryan McGee. I'm a senior writer with ESPN the magazine. Paul asked me to come in while he's doing his last-minute Christmas shopping. Maybe he's decorating the house. He hasn't been in Charlotte very long. Maybe he's decorating the house. Some of those big inflatable deals you put out in the front yard. I don't know. I'll have to drop by. Speaking of dropping by, Marty Smith, my co-host for the Marty and McGee podcast on ESPN.com, is hurtling at a high rate of speed, as a NASCAR reporter should. On his way down here, going to join us in studio shortly. He's been up at Ohio State, been down at Florida State. We're going to talk about that Sugar Bowl matchup and talk about Jameis Winston. Brad Edwards has some interesting comments about Winston as well. You can join us, 855-242-7285. And one of those callers right now is Colton in Kentucky, and Colton wants to talk about the playoff. Colton, what you got, buddy?
Well, I would just like to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy
You too.
New Year before we can start.
I appreciate that. You too.
All right. Now, do you believe that the college playoffs were designed correctly?
I had my reservations, but now I kind of dig it. I kind of like it. I was one of these that immediately wanted to go to 8, 16, but I kind of like it at 4 right now. What do you think?
Well, I think that Florida State should be a little bit higher, but it's all right, though.
Yeah, you're not alone. There are a lot of people who think that. But they're in it.
Yeah.
My argument has always been, once you get in that 4, does it really matter? I mean, other than maybe some sort of home field advantage. But to me, other than just a respect thing, you're in the deal. So just take care of your business. All 4 teams are good. So if you take care of your business, I don't know that the postseason rankings even matter at that small a number.
Well, the SEC is such a strong conference.
Oh, yeah, it's huge. Yeah, I live in North Carolina. I grew up with ACC football. It's cataclysmic everywhere you go. You know that.
Also, I want to make sure I tell you Merry Christmas, Ryan. We appreciate you filling in as well.
Well, I appreciate that, Colton, and I hope everything's good up in Kentucky. We got somebody else who wants to talk about the playoff, Matt from Tennessee. I got the feeling Colton wasn't crazy about the playoff format, and Matt, I don't think you are either, right?
No, not at all. When I first heard that the 4 system was coming out, I was like, "Are you serious? Like, who's going to decide?" And the whole power ranking thing is dumb. The way it should be done is, if you look at it, there's 128 Division I single A teams, whatever. So you can divide that evenly into 16-team divisions, and for a total of 8 16-team divisions. They play their championship, then you have 8 champions going to an 8-player system. Then there's no power rankings, there's no opinion, no nothing.
So everybody, it's a bunkhouse stampede. Everybody in, last man standing wins.
Yeah, just like the NFL does it.
Well, how do you rank? You have to rank them at some point, though, right? Like,
No.
it's just based
So
on...
what you do is you just take. So you'll have 16 teams in each conference. You'll have 8 total conferences. They'll all play for a championship. They'll have 2 divisions: East, West, North, South, whatever. Then they'll play their championship just like the SEC does, and then you get a champion. You take each of those champions from your 8 conferences, and then you randomly pit each conference against each other.
So how big is your regular season now? You playing like 7 games?
Your regular season is you just play everyone once in your division. So you got 7 games there. You can have 1 bye week, and then you can fill it in with whatever else, like rivalry games that are like out of conference or out of division, or you could fill it with the smaller schools to, give them some notoriety and money, like the previous club was talking about.
All right.
So you could have the same amount, and it would work out, but no one's going to do it because it makes too much sense.
No one's going to do it because it makes too much sense. Okay. Bunkhouse Stampede. That's what I'm going to call that the Matt Bunkhouse Stampede playoff model. And for the old wrestling fans, you know what a Bunkhouse Stampede is, and I feel like we probably have a lot of old wrestling fans listening. Yeah? Listen, my feeling on the playoff, I'm actually working on a column about this for ESPN the magazine for our big championship drive issue, which comes out just prior to the playoff, or to the championship, what do we call it, the playoff. You can't call it playoffs, it's playoff. And I was an 8-team guy all along. 8 teams, got to have 8 teams at least. You know, I grew up with 1AA, or what we call it, FCS football, where you had 16 in. I like that. But I got to be honest, I kind of was digging what was going down that last weekend. This was the first time since the championship games were started in 1992 with, of course, that first SEC title game with Alabama and Florida. This was the first weekend where we had a full slate of conference championship games. They all mattered. They all mattered. We'd never had that before. Mark Helfrich, the head coach at Oregon, what he said, this was the first round of the playoff for us. And I'm sitting in the press box at the ACC championship game, and I'm watching Art Briles yell at the commissioner of the Big 12. I'm watching Jimbo Fisher kind of call all of us down for asking why they aren't ranked number 1. I got Saban and Atlanta saying, well, you know, the BCS is pretty good. I mean, and everybody's lobbying. Commissioner of the Big Ten looked right at the television and dared the committee and said Ohio State's clearly one of the 4 best teams in the country. That was awesome. And, yes, teams got left out. If we went to 8, that argument would have been with 2 lost teams. But instead we were having the argument at 4 with 1 lost teams. To me, that's just a better argument. Right? Jordan from Birmingham.
Yeah, I just got something to say about the guy, Colton, that was calling. He said he's a Florida State fan and was upset that his team wasn't really ranked as high as it was. He kind of made a point saying that the ACC is a tough conference, and I really don't understand why he thinks that. I mean, is there anyone that you really think is, besides Florida State, that's really that interesting to watch in the ACC?
Yeah, I think he was being facetious. That's where I was going with it. When I agreed with him and talked about how great it was, and I grew up in the ACC, I felt like he was taking a shot. So I think he needed a hashtag sarcasm attached to what he said, because I feel like I'm with you. I'm with you. At first I was like, hey, wait, is he being serious?
Right.
But I don't think he was.
Right, when you got 2 12-1 teams that are ranked ahead of him, it's kind of hard to believe. But what I want to say is, I'm an Alabama fan, and you know, the thing about the playoffs and having the committee and everything, you know, when Auburn beat Ole Miss and Alabama was still sitting at 8-1, 7-1, whatever it was at the time, and it seems like for 2 or 3 weeks we just couldn't get out of the number 5 spot. You know, with the rankings being decided by a group of people, I mean, with Alabama beating the teams that they did with the power rankings, you know, it wouldn't be long just before they eventually had to confess that Alabama is the best in the country, you know, beating in the conference that they are and beating the teams that they beat where they were ranked.
Yeah, I mean, listen, here's how I felt. Thanks for the call. I felt like the committee, whether they were even conscious of it or not, kind of were looking down the road at what they thought would happen. I think the issue came with the fact that they released their rankings so many weeks in advance of what the final rankings were. Now, listen, as a writer and as a guy who gets paid to go on ESPNU and talk about this stuff, it's great. I mean, every week we had something to talk about. Is TCU getting jobbed? Is Baylor getting jobbed? Why isn't Alabama moving up? Why isn't so-and-so moving up? Is Mississippi State really that good? But I think the committee was looking ahead. And they figured that Baylor-TCU thing was going to sort itself out. It didn't. But I think they thought, okay, if we have to have the head-to-head argument, it'll be at the end. And that's what they did. They kind of fell on that at the end. But I think they looked into the crystal ball and said, listen, this SEC thing is going to sort itself out. And it did. But, man, they were flirting with a mess. What's the song? Flirting with Disaster? Molly Hatchet? Did I just show my age right there? Raymond, you want to talk about the college football? I'm good, man. You want to talk playoff too, right?
Yeah, I want to talk playoffs.
Uh-oh. Yeah, Raymond's gone. I think that we always talk about the power that the selection committee wields, and if you call in to complain about the playoff, maybe they shoot some sort of x-rays at you and shut that down.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Been talking today about bowl games, been talking about playoffs. We're going to talk now about kind of a story that kind of got buried because of when it broke. It broke on Sunday evening in the middle of all the NFL stuff, and that's Jameis Winston. Was cleared Sunday of all the accusations he'd faced from the student code of conduct hearing that, of course, happened, a couple weeks ago. And this is basically moving on to maybe an appeal. But regardless of what the next step is, it's not going to affect the next step for Jameis Winston football-wise.
Mm-hmm. He's going to be playing football.
Hey, who's that, everybody? That's Marty Smith.
I was just going to say, right before we get into Jameis, I was listening to you on the way down here while I was in traffic. Insane. If y'all are in Charlotte listening to the Paul Finebaum Show with Ryan McGee, leave early. I-77 is a mess. I-277 and I-485 and the whole town is just a mess.
But we're glad you're here. Marty Smith, of course, you guys all recognize the redheaded bearded man from SportsCenter.
One of the coolest things that I can remember from my youth, I'm a huge Virginia Tech guy. My whole family went to school in Blacksburg, myself not included, myself notwithstanding. But I remember in 1986, the Hokies were playing in the Peach Bowl down in Atlanta, and Chris Kinzer.
Is that an NC State game?
That was the NC State game.
Fake injury.
Yep.
Yep.
Chris Kinzer he was one of those straight-on kickers. Tom Dempsey, straight on.
Pat Summerall.
And made the field goal. And to this day in Blacksburg, there are still posters up, and it's called The Kick.
That's it.
Those games did matter.
Yeah.
Major League mattered.
Yeah.
And, of course, with the new scenario, which, I was listening on the way down here to your commentary and what the folks are calling in saying, it has been diluted dramatically by the BCS era and then certainly now with the playoff era. Okay, go, carry on with Jameis.
No, you're good. And if you've enjoyed the last 45 seconds, Marty and I, of course, have our Marty McGee podcast at ESPN.com. So, check that out. Download it. So if Jameis Winston wins out, if he wins the next two games, what does that mean for his legacy as a college football player? Our buddy Brad Edwards addressed this on the Championship Drive podcast earlier.
If there doesn't end up being anything more than what we've heard to this point, then I think over the course of time, that will be less and less a part of his story. If they were to win these next two games and he goes to the NFL with a Heisman Trophy and not only two national championships, but having never lost a game as a starting quarterback, compare that to Marcus Mariota, who we were just talking about, who only one conference championship is what he has to show in terms of rings. I think Jameis, of those two, if it played out that way, would be the one who would be remembered much more fondly in college football history.
Agree.
I mean, you throw that resume up there, that's as good as anyone's ever done.
All right, so Marty Smith, you have spent a lot of time with the Florida State Seminoles.
I have, man.
Over the last couple of weeks. It
I
started,
feel like I should be carrying around a spear and just like throwing it at stuff.
Well, it started with you. You did all the build-up on SportsCenter. You did all the build-up to the ACC Championship game.
Yep.
And then you weren't even there for the game. You got on a plane and went to Tallahassee. I covered the game for .com, and you were waiting on the team when you got there and were with the team when they found out they were in the playoff officially. You spent time last week specifically with Jameis Winston. In the middle of all this, and obviously before we knew that he would be cleared by this panel of the student conduct panel. So what's your read on the guy? Where is he right now?
I think he is a really intelligent young man who's made some dumb decisions. And I think that all you really need to know about his football talent and his football IQ is where our experts at ESPN have him ranked. He's still second, despite all of that baggage. And look, this is not backroom GM source information. This is out there for all of us to see, real-time, undeniable stuff, right? Between the crab leg thing and the obscene hollering thing, those were bad decisions. And I think that despite all of that, the fact that he's still number 2 on the board to be drafted really tells you all that you need to know, because for most, I think for a lot of kids, and I would love to get like Todd or Mel's thoughts on this, but I think a lot of kids that have that attached to them, that off-the-field drama is the right word, attached to them, they'd be toxic. But Jameis Winston's still number 2 on their board. And I think, too, another thing I read, back to him being I think he's a really smart kid. He's smarter than he lets on. And I think he really wants to be liked. I think that's part of it, too.
You see, the perception of him is fair or unfair. He doesn't care what anybody thinks.
I think that's inaccurate.
You get. That's not the feeling you get.
I think that's inaccurate. I think he wants to be liked. And look, I don't disparage that. So do I. A lot of people do. And anybody, I've met a lot of professional athletes during my career, as have you, certainly as has Paul. There are very few. I've met a lot of athletes who want to portray that they don't care what you think, but I've met a less than the 5 fingers on my hand who really don't care.
Right.
There's only a couple people I've ever met in my life that don't read it, don't hear it, and don't care one iota what you, me, or anybody else has to say except for the Lord. And I really believe that Jameis Winston likes to be liked. And I think to a degree that has probably driven some of the narrative of his time at Florida State University. Now, I did have occasion to sit down with him. I sat him down for 20 or so minutes, and likable kid. And again, as you stated, we didn't know anything about the student conduct hearing at that time.
Right.
And they don't talk about it.
This was what, last Wednesday, Thursday, Tuesday?
This was last Thursday.
Yeah, so a week ago.
This was last Thursday.
Yep.
And I enjoyed my conversation with him. And I've spent, I've only had that 20 minutes with Jameis Winston, but I've spent a lot of time with Jimbo Fisher. And he led me to believe from the second I sat down with him in his office. He was kind enough to invite me into his office, just him and me, and the sports information director, watching the Final Four selection show live.
And that's how they found out. Urban Meyer talked about that with Paul last week. That's how they had no hint, no clue. FSU had a pretty good idea they'd be in, but they didn't know till they actually saw it.
It was a very interesting moment for me because I had just met Coach Fisher. 20 minutes before that or whatnot. And he had led me to believe, back to Jameis just a second, unequivocally, they felt like Jameis was going to be playing football. They felt like this was what was going to happen in terms of the outcome of the judge's, what do you call it? Investigation, yeah, I guess. Yeah. So that's my read on Jameis Winston. I think that he has a great opportunity for a great NFL career. If it's going to be interesting for him to learn how to trust, I think, as well.
Well, Paul and I talked about this, about Jimbo Fisher. And it's no secret that Paul and he's very critical of Jimbo and the way he approaches a lot of things. And he and I talked a couple of weeks ago on this show about how did he get to that point, about being, at least with a group of media, being a little standoffish. We saw he spoke earlier today at practice, Florida State, and, kind of keeping his distance a little bit. And I think part of that is that as you move up the ladder and when you become the guy, there's a part of you that thinks that it's going to be like it used to be. And particularly the regional media going to look out for you a little bit. And then when that doesn't happen, and when the satellite truck's in the parking lot with Marty Smith every day, I think it's very easy, whether you're the coach or whether you're the star, to start backing up and to start building those walls.
Yep. I don't think there's any question. You look at Marshawn Lynch right now, not to get off on an NFL tangent on this show, but look at him.
Yeah.
He answered 12 questions last evening after the greatest run of his career and an eye-popping moment in a dominant victory by his team that really solidified them as the contenders, the lead dogs in the NFC. And he said, thank you,
yeah.
Thank you, appreciate it. So,
and some people think it's awful and some people think it's cool. Hey, listen.
That's a whole tangent.
I want you to stick around. We're going to take a break. and then we're going to revisit this topic. Marty Smith from ESPN joins us.
This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
I got to get a Toys R Us after this. That's going to be a little
brutal.
Bit of a mess.
I mean,
yeah.
that's a sentence.
I got to pick up one thing. Marty Smith's with us. Marty Smith, of course, my cohort from the Marty McGee podcast, and Marty is here today because over the last couple of weeks he spent a lot of time in Tallahassee, and then he spent some time up in Columbus, Ohio.
Did.
Had you ever been like up on campus, Horseshoe and all that stuff?
Negative. I was floored.
It's
at
a
their
beautiful
facilities.
place, isn't it?
It is stunning. They have tremendous facilities, wonderful staff, great kids. Sat Cardale Jones down to ask him why he sent that tweet.
Yeah.
And he said he embarrassed himself, his family, and his institution, and the most uncomfortable he's ever been was sitting in Urban Meyer's office after that happened.
If you want to get in on the conversation, you can call us 1-855-242-7285, 855-242-7285. And we kind of have taken this direction today, ever since Marty got here, and it's this responsibility that these young guys have that they're not prepared for.
No, it's impossible to be prepared because, you know, you're coming of age, you're doing all the stupid mess that we did as kids in the public eye, and even more than in the public eye, in the social media age. And that's a whole other level of public eye.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't want it. No way.
Well, it's one of the things that, again, I wrote that story for ESPN magazine back in August and talked to these social media experts.
Oh.
And Kathleen Hesser, you know, her son races, you and I both know, as the ARCA series guy. And Kathleen was kind of the front line, you know, crisis management person that Penn State brought in. And she's very modest about it and didn't get into a lot of details, but what the Penn State people talk about is these people that understand the impact of everything you do. Every tweet, every press release, everything you say, the backdrop behind you at a press conference, and understanding, you know, the waves, the ripple effect that all those things cause.
So far above my pay grade.
Yeah, well, that's just it. But they talk about it. She didn't talk about this. They talk about her coming in, and this is like 2 days into the thing. And this, of course, the Jerry Sandusky, when that story just exploded and Paterno was on his way out, didn't know it yet. But they bring her in, and the way they described it to me was her taking every social media outlet, which 3 years ago wasn't what it is now. I mean, kids are getting in trouble now on social media sites I've never even heard of.
Oh, me too.
But they put this stuff out there, and she put it all. They described it to me that it was like a beautiful mind when the guy puts all the stuff on the wall. And there's pieces that come together. And her line was, if you are reacting to what's happening right now, you're already too slow because you need to start thinking about what's going to happen next and what you're going to react to then. And that's what these schools are doing. They're bringing in, out on the West Coast, I had 2 Pac-12 schools talk to me about bringing in these Hollywood PR firms to kind of lay out, okay, this, you know, I've handled so-and-so, a sex tape scandal with this Hollywood movie star. And what I learned was this: if you find yourself in a situation like Florida State or like whomever, this is what you need to do. This is the plan you need to have. And these schools are enlisting help now because in the past, the sports information director is just the person that handles all this. And now what these guys, what these men and women realize is they're not equipped for this. They're equipped to give you your game notes and set up your interviews. They're not equipped to do
crisis management,
damage control. And that's what these schools are having to kind of wrap their brains around now, which is understanding what's only happened in the last 5 years. And it really kind of all this started with having a conversation with we were sitting on the set at the Rose Bowl last year, the day of the national championship game, and sitting there talking to Jesse Palmer. And Tebow, word got out that Tebow, before he was working with SEC Network, was on the grounds, and social media went crazy. And Jesse looked at me and he said, "Can you imagine what it would be like if Tebow came along now?" And what it told me was it's just so much louder now than it was even 5-6 years ago.
It really is. And the ripple effect is so dramatic, and the venom is so dramatic. And it just gives everyone a direct channel to disseminate whatever opinion they want to, and they can say it however they want to. And you just, as an amateur athlete, when there's as much money and as much attention and as much passion as is involved in college sports today, it behooves every university to try. And they're 18 to 21-year-old kids. You don't care what somebody tells you when you're 18 to 21 years old. You're absolutely indestructible in every single facet of your life in your own head until something happens like that.
Well, and the difference is that you and I were 10 foot tall and bulletproof when we were college freshmen, but we weren't on national television.
We were nobodies.
Yeah, we were nobodies. And so, and the consequences of the times that you did screw something up, now you screw it up. It's on SportsCenter. It's on the front page of every sports website. And the crossover is, and this is something that these social media experts said, they said, this isn't just a sports media thing. This is a media thing. The Jameis Winston thing became Good Morning America. And we experienced this in our other world, in NASCAR, when the Tony Stewart accident happened this summer, and the kid was killed tragically in this accident. For the first time in a long time, maybe since Dale Earnhardt's death, you're dealing with media, and now it's not just, USA Today Sports or ESPN.com or whoever. Now it's the New York Times, and it's Wall Street Journal.
I was doing Good Morning America as the sun rose in Watkins Glen, New York that morning.
Yeah, and it's papers from around the world, and this is it's TMZ.
You know what I wonder?
Different layer.
Here's a question. So, as I recall, and I might be remiss because I don't know specifics, but as I recall, the Jameis Winston obscene commentary
in the student union
was really a social media driven story, right? So if that would have happened 10 years ago,
nobody knows.
It never would have happened 10 years ago.
It's a funny story that people tell on campus.
Right. It's a wives' tale,
right.
Or it's one of those tales that you hear.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. DeAndre from Tuscaloosa is joining us, and he wants to talk about player conduct.
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Hey, bud. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you all. So I hope you and your families have a blessed Christmas and a blessed New Year.
Thank you.
You too, bud.
I guess with me, I'm only 31 years old. I was kind of raised with the old school type mentality. I understand that players now are completely different than, from how they were a few years ago. But I just really feel that when you go out and you win these prestigious awards and your team is playing quite well and you in the public eye, that it's kind of like a double score thing, at the same time. You're doing great things at the same time. You're being watched every time you walk outside your apartment, or you're being watched every time you go outside a store. My point that I'm trying to make is, Jameis Winston, I want to go back to what you all was talking about earlier. Jameis Winston is one of the greatest college athletes that we got going right now. But just because you've got God-given talent doesn't mean that it's okay to break the rules. And, that's something that should be instilled in every high school athlete, that's coming out of high school going into college to play ball or have aspirations on going on a little further in life, That just because I'm who I am or just because where I am, may be able to do this and get away with it and that's a slap on the wrist. That should be the time where it should be said, well, just because I'm where I am and who I am, I need to be extra careful about, what I do. It's not saying that you shouldn't be able to have fun and go out and do the things that high school, students do or college students do or whatever. It's just saying that you kind of being held to a higher standard because you were being a role model. And I just feel that he really did get off kind of easy with some of the things that he did, this year or last year or whatever. And I just feel that, it's time out for just saying that, okay, they're young guys and they college kids or they should be having fun. You can have fun without getting in trouble.
Absolutely.
One of the most disappointing things, man, to me was to disappoint anybody in my family that raised me and helped me get through college because it was so hard, And the only thing I ever wanted to do was to make them proud. And it's like now it's kind of different. It's like people don't really care. It's like the mentality of today's teenager is totally different than how it was when I was in college, over 10 years ago. So my opinion, and you guys just, I'm going to hang up and I'm going to listen to you guys. I just tell me what you think about this. I just feel that you should be held to a high standard just because, you know, you are in the social eye, you are in the social media, and kids are looking at you, and then they say, well, if he got away with it, then maybe I'll be able to get away with it. Thanks.
John Andre, thanks for the call. And I think, listen, again, I say this I use this phrase all the time, fair or unfair. But the simple fact of the matter is that you are held to you should be held to a different code of conduct because you are the face of the university. That's what you signed on for. And it's a great point DeAndre brings up, which is, you know, what are you teaching them? Because my question is, and I'm not even talking about the rape allegations. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the other stuff.
Yeah, right.
If he wasn't who he was, would even and I've talked about this a lot on television. I know we got to hit a break here in a second, but even when he moved the official out of the way under center, you know, that became a big deal because of who he was.
Yep.
And then the question was, well, did he get away with not having a penalty because of who he was? But listen, that's what comes with being the guy.
To put a bow on DeAndre's point, to whom much is given, much is expected.
Right.
And when you achieve that level of success, again, we've said it ad nauseum, Heisman Trophy, 29 straight games, the whole thing. Face of a university, which is one of the most storied programs in the history of college football. Yes, your standards are higher among the community.
Thank you for listening to the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast. Tune into the Paul Finebaum Show every day from 3 to 7 Eastern on the SEC Network or on the ESPN radio app. This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast. This is the best of the Paul Finebaum podcast.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.